Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of our Thrive in China Roundtable. Before we start today's roundtable, again, it's just for us to get to know our new community members. We would love to know a little bit about your background. Are you newbies to China? Are you startups in China? Are you experienced China hands? Give us a little bit of an insight into what stage of your China journey are you in. This always helps us in terms of how to steer the conversations we have on these roundtables. Obviously, I go slower if there are more newbies, and I go a little bit faster if there are more experienced China hands. So do let me know what your background is. For those of you that are new to our roundtable, my name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have over 18 years of experience in corporate services and corporate compliance in China. We are headquartered in Hong Kong. We have our subsidiary in Shanghai, where we then cater to our mainland Chinese clients who are based throughout the Chinese market. We help our clients throughout their China journey and Hong Kong journey through the administrative measures that they have to take. So we do help companies in their pre-investment stage, in their implementation stage, and also within scaling and growing up in the market. We have formulated a series of administrative processes. If you are interested in getting copies of these administrative processes, do let us know. This gives you great insight into the pre-investment stage of your setup, but also just the ongoing operational phases. Let us know. We've no longer put them up on our website, but if you do want more information on that, just email us and we'll send you over the links. And if you haven't received a copy yet and you would like to receive a copy, we've got a free ebook on the 10 biggest mistakes companies make in China. Just email me at Christina@woodburnglobal.com, and I'd be happy to send over a free copy. So let's get cracking on roundtable number 16 for 2023, where we're going to be talking how corporate banking has changed in China this year. To start off today's presentation, I am going to talk about insight in terms of choosing banks in China, where I would recommend going as of this year and why. I will also be talking about operational aspects of operating a bank account, and specifically there, how things have actually changed come 2023. So to get cracking, the first topic we're going to talk about is how to open a corporate account in China. Now, when I talk about opening up a corporate account in China, I am talking about setting up a subsidiary in China and then opening a corporate account based on that Chinese subsidiary. There are bank account options in China, and now I've forgotten the name on the top of my head of what they're called, but basically you can open from your overseas jurisdiction corporate accounts in China. So to give you an example, if you are a UK-based entity, if you're a Hong Kong-based entity, if you're a German-based entity, a US-based entity, you can open up a corporate account in China from that company. However, you will have limitations on what you can do through that account. Generally speaking, it is more of an expense account where you can pay certain expenses and suppliers, but you cannot receive revenue. It is really important if you're interested in understanding how to open up those accounts. I'm not an expert on that whatsoever. That is not my expertise because primarily you have to provide all the supporting documentation from your overseas entity to open that account. But I can offer you the contact information of a bank in China who does do it, and they can then go through with you in English what it means to open such an account and what the limitations are. So if you are interested in that, do let me know. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we are going to be talking about opening up a corporate account for a Chinese entity. So if you're opening up a subsidiary in China, what does that mean? So the key points to remember is the following. The account opening process should not determine how you choose your banking partner. You will find that the opening processes with foreign banks are much more tedious and lengthy compared to local Chinese banks. But if your goal is to work with a foreign bank, then do not let that step determine your decision, right? You might get more advantages by working with an international bank than a Chinese bank. So understand what your needs are from your banks, and do not let the account opening process determine who you're going to choose as your banking partner. Think about the long-term longevity of your organization and what banks you want to collaborate with. Remember that the partnership should last the full validity of your organization. I do say hopefully, because that was not the case for me. Unfortunately, about 15 years into working with a specific bank, I was asked to leave and to move within 30 working days. So remember, do your homework, interview the banks, understand what needs you want first, to then understand whether they can fulfill those needs. And I'll go through all of these points in today's presentation. So I really, really want to encourage people in the incorporation phase of their entity in China. And even if you are already established, you can still get to know your bank. So this is a homework piece that should just always be done. Understand who you're working with. All right. So if you are in the incorporation phase, now is the time to do your homework. Interview at least 2 to 3 different banks. You should be interviewing them. Okay. In order to interview them, I have, and I will touch on this, I've provided an agenda of questions you should be raising with them pertaining to the needs that you might have with them. The biggest downfall I have with clients is their expectation that a lawyer or a corporate service provider or an accountant should choose their bank. It's not our job to choose your bank. It's also not our job to interview your banks. We can advise, I can certainly recommend, but this is all based on my experience working with several banks on behalf of my clients, like physically going on the online platforms and giving you my perspective of what they look like and comparing them. In the end of the day, you should be formulating a relationship with your banking partner. I already have my own relationship with my bank. I don't need to formulate others. All right. So this is something I really, really, really want to emphasize on. In order to aid you, I have also provided a list of questions that you should be raising with your bank. And these lists of questions should actually be part of your thought process on how to operate the account. This is vital pertaining to all the changes that I have seen with the banks this year. Okay. So I really, really want you to have these discussions, this open dialogue with the banks. Now, if you are in the incorporation phase, a few things that you should be aware of. When you are interviewing these banks, ask for the document lists of what is required. Do this homework prior to even incorporating. This should be homework that you do, not rushed at when your lawyer or corporate service provider says, okay, now it's time to open the account. Which bank do you want to use? This is homework that should be done well in advance. Once the business license is issued and you will be notified from your lawyer, your corporate service provider, your incorporation agent that the business license has been issued, they will then submit all the originals to the bank directly. But there could very well be other information that the bank requires from you in terms of how you want to operate the account, which is why that homework should be done in advance. Because there are things like questions they will ask, like, who will be the contact people for us at the bank? Who will be the authorizer on the bank account? Who will be the cashier on the bank account? Who will have the various key tokens? What mobile numbers are we going to be registering, etc. And this is very, very important because only Chinese mobiles can be registered. Only Chinese mobile numbers can be registered with the banks. So it's important to understand who's going to have access to all of this. Okay, and again, this homework should be done in advance. Now, depending on the location of where you decide to open up your entity, and depending on the bank you choose, I would say 80% of most banks will follow the system now since COVID, where they will say you do a video, the legal representative will do a video recording where they hold up their passport. They have a little bit of a blurb to repeat, which is, yes, I am the legal representative of XYZ company, and I authorize the opening of this bank account on XYZ date. And we want to open up XYZ accounts in order to be able to operate in China. It's a video that you record, you then send this video recording to the bank, and then that will be part of their due diligence process. Now, in places like Shenzhen, and this was a huge problem during COVID, the bank's still required to meet the legal representative in person and to show the original passport in person. So it's really important, again, do your homework and understand if this is a requirement or not, okay? I cannot know for every single branch and every single bank what are going to be the requirements for the incorporation step. So it's really important to know when you've decided on the location, you've decided on which bank, you've decided on the branch, what are then these nitty-gritty details that you have to be aware of, okay? And obviously, as your corporate service provider, or as any corporate service provider, we can help you in that communication, but it has to be steered by you. The banks do not always like working with the lawyers and corporate service providers because they know we are the intermediaries. So sometimes we don't always get the right information. All right. Now, in addition to all of this, since August 2020, it is a requirement that the bank has to visit your registered office address. This is a requirement by the PBOC, which is the People's Bank of China, to prove that you are not a virtual office location. Now, this is something that has become routine, which is why it's also really important that if you're choosing a virtual office location, that the business center is fully aware of this regulation and also knows how to deal with these meetings should a government officer, should a bank officer come and visit the office, okay? If you're working with business centers like Regis, the Executive Center, CEO Suite, a bunch of others that are very well known, they will know how to facilitate these discussions, okay? So please be aware of this visit. If you're planning to go into an industrial park or into a free trade zone and you want to start off because the Promotions Bureau is offering you free rent for a fake office space, they need to be aware of this as well. And many aren't. And then you run into difficulties because the bank can't approve the bank account opening process. So I do want people to be aware of this. Now, if everything goes smoothly, which might not always be the case, the whole bank account opening process can take around 25 to 30 working days, of which 3/4 of that time, so about 20 working days, is purely spent on the bank doing a due diligence on the shareholder and ultimately the beneficial owners of the shareholder. Okay, so the bank does require a full organogram to understand who are the beneficial owners of this organization, and anybody who owns 10% or more of the shares will have to show their passport copies, and a due diligence is done on them, okay? So obviously the more complicated and complex your structure, the more time they're gonna require to do your due diligence, okay? So this is just for opening up the capital account and renminbi basic account, and I will go through later on what are the different accounts and what you need to be aware of based on the banks you're choosing. So the next step then after this is that you have to open up the online banking operation, okay? What I have just highlighted is purely getting bank account details, i.e. bank account numbers. I have not even spoken yet about the online banking operation, which in China are called cash management platforms, okay? They use this term in English, cash management platforms, which are the online banking systems. This is a step that is done once the account numbers are provided, okay? And this can usually take an additional 10 working days in order to get these approvals. Now, one thing that I need to highlight, and I'll go back, is I said that the legal representative has to show his original passport in a video. What I didn't mention is that original passport needs to come to the bank, not necessarily with the legal rep. So during COVID, most of our clients, in order to avoid the quarantine regulations, would courier their original passports to us, and we would need it for at least 10 working days. Why? Because there's the meeting that is required at the bank to show the original passport, and then there is a meeting to do the cash management platform application, okay? So it's at least 10 working days that's required. If you decide that you don't want to courier your passports, that's totally up to the legal rep to decide that. You do have to account for at least 2 weeks of being in location because the bank will require that passport. So take that into consideration. And I just want to add, it could be even longer, depending on delays at the bank itself. If they can't get the meetings, if they're fully booked, we get whatever slots are available at the point that our due diligence is completed for the client. So a lot of it is dependent on the bank's schedule versus your schedule. Once the online banking operation is completed, you can then remit the registered capital that you've designated. If you haven't watched our previous episodes, I've gone through what registered capital is and working capital. Please go review those videos. And if you've got any questions or discussion points, let me know. One of the, I guess, old-fashioned and outdated problems, if you will, in China is the rigidness and strictness around foreign capital, registered capital coming from abroad into China. In order to use this capital initially, and really we're talking about the first 3 to 12 months, it could very well be that you have to go through a painful process of showing whatever expenses you need to pay upfront to the bank before that capital can actually be utilized. Some banks are less rigid on this than others, and some cities might have different regulations on this as well compared to others. We have one client that has set up in Changshu, and their bank is an absolute nightmare. We have to show all types of supporting documentation in order to be able to release those funds and pay for those expenses, whether it's office rent, headcount, salary, social insurance, housing fund, reimbursement of expenses to staff, etc. They want all the details. They want all the receipts. It is painful. And what we've realized is that the Chinese general manager who chose the bank on behalf of the company never really did a proper homework session interviewing the banks on what all of this means. And this is part of the agenda that we send to our clients, is to discuss these types of points in terms of operating the account. Some will be easier compared to others, all right? What we have discovered is that if you choose a bank branch that does not have experience working with foreign invested companies, you will find they are more rigid and strict than working with bigger branches that have 80% of their clients being foreign invested companies, where it becomes a just straightforward principle of following certain things, right? So that should be part of the interview process as well. Now, interview agenda points, okay? And again, like I said, this is your homework. You need to decide what bank you want to work with. You need to decide also what bank branch would be the best for you. And I'll talk about location a little bit later on. But just to give you an overview of what agenda points I would recommend. One is, first of all, have an open discussion about your business model. You've got to tell the bank, what are you doing in China? Okay, what are your trade models looking like? What are your service models looking like? What type of expenses are you going to have? So they have a full understanding of what business they're going to generate out of you, right? Are you going to have inbound transactions from abroad? Are you going to have outbound transactions to abroad? How much domestic transactions are you going to have? And what types of transactions will you have? You should also be talking about what your needs are. And I'll touch on that a little bit later on, but just briefly, do you need loans? Do you need credit lines? What do you need from them, if anything? Okay. So give them this overview. Explain to them, what does your supply chain look like? What does your transactional model look like? The next thing you should be asking is, based off of that business plan and business model that you've gone through with them, you should be asking them, how many accounts are you going to open? Okay. Now I can give you insight to this, and I will be giving you insight to this on this webinar, but this client of mine in Changshu, where almost every other branch I've worked with in other jurisdictions, Ningbo, Dalian, Tianjin, obviously Shanghai, Beijing, and the bigger cities. I've never had this experience before, and this is why I want to say there are changes that are potentially coming up in 2023. But generally, you only have to open up 2 accounts, a capital account, a capital contribution account, and a renminbi basic account. That renminbi basic account is flexible, that it can receive funds in foreign currency from abroad, and they do then the exchange within that account. It is an account that basically can do everything for you. With this specific Changshu Bank branch, that's not feasible. And if they would have known this, if they would have asked this question during the meeting, which is that the renminbi basic account is only utilized for domestic transactions. In order to do inbound, outbound, overseas, cross-border transactions, they have to open up a separate settlement account in foreign currency to be able to initiate that. Okay? If you don't have this open dialogue with the bank, how can you know what the rules and regulations are of that branch? Okay? So now this client has to set up this separate account, which will take another 25 to 30 working days. Okay, it's time wastage. And this is something that's new that is happening right now, is that every single branch, it doesn't even matter if it's Bank of China, Changshu, Bank of China, Shanghai, they will have different internal policies. Okay? And if I don't have a client that's based in Changshu who has never worked with Bank of China and that specific branch, I won't be able to give the advisory on that, right? I can tell you generically what is happening and what you need to think about. But I can't give you the specifics of what the policies are for every single branch, which is why these interviews are vital. Okay. The next question you should be asking about is, what is the document list for the setup of the accounts? And most importantly, what is the legal rep passport? When is the legal rep passport required? And are there any other documents that are needed from the legal rep at any point? The reason why I say this is we have one client with China Merchants Bank in Shanghai, and for any inbound, any cross-border transaction, a passport copy is required, newly photocopied and chopped. So it's an administrative process that's tedious. Wish we could avoid it. This specific branch is requiring it. Okay? You've got to ask if they can send the full document list needed for the opening, but be open with them and say, I want to know legal rep passport. When do you need it? When do you need photocopies? Is it needed for transactional proof, etc. Okay. The next question is, how does the online banking platform work? And as I said, in China, the online banking, let me go back. The online banking platform is called the cash management system. Why do I say check it out? Because in reality, all of the online banking platforms are bilingual. Some are easier to use compared to others, just of the visual of the platform. And again, this is my opinion. I have worked with Bank of Shanghai online, China Merchants Bank online, ICBC online, HSBC online, and I've also worked with, I forgot now. I've worked with a few. I find ICBC extremely easy to use. China Merchants Bank, Bank of Shanghai are so-so. HSBC is like the global standard online banking platform. So if you're used to working with them, it would be the same visual. So it's why not get a demo, right? If you are able to get a demo from the bank so that you can visualize what it looks like. And the most important thing is checking that the English and Chinese versions are synced, okay? When I log into these accounts, I prefer to go in on the English version so I don't make any mistakes whatsoever. But sometimes I do have a fear that the synchronization between the English and Chinese is not always there, or there are delays, okay? So just check it. What we want you to be aware of with the cash management platform system is that there are 2 key tokens that are provided. One is given to a cashier, one is given to an authorizer. The downside of the cash management platforms in China are the following when you work with local banks. One, you cannot gain access to them with a Mac computer. Does not work. So if you have a Mac computer, be prepared. You won't be able to log on to any Chinese bank system. Okay? Doesn't even matter about a VPN. It's the MAC system. It does not synchronize with the banking platform systems. I'm using a Lenovo ThinkPad in order to be able to access all of the online platforms. Number two, and some of you might be amazed by this, in order to gain access to these cash management platforms, you have to log in using Internet Explorer 7, which no longer exists. But I have found a way with Microsoft Edge that you can get the Internet Explorer 7 up, and whenever you want to log on to these cash management platform systems, you are using the Internet Explorer 7. No choice around that. The Chinese government is not changing this. It doesn't seem like they're planning on changing this, and this is for whatever local Chinese bank, okay? You have to log in through the Internet Explorer 7. Another thing, I was going to mention a third thing about the platform. So one is Mac doesn't work. The other is you've got to use Internet Explorer 7 firewalls. If you have a firewall within your company and your HQ, most likely you won't be able to get Internet Explorer 7. I work from an office space. I cannot log on. I work in a Regis Business Center. I cannot log on to these cash management platforms because of the Regis firewall. I can only log on to these systems when I'm at home. So you need to be aware of whether a firewall will prevent you from logging in, and you have to discuss what it means in order to be able to gain access to these accounts. Okay, so 3 things about the cash management platforms. One is Mac doesn't work. Number 2 is you need Internet Explorer 7. 3, check your internal firewalls, making sure that you have the ability to gain access. I can only do it from home. Okay, so be aware of that. When you're using the online banking platform system, whether you're using the English version or Chinese version, you have to be aware that all of the beneficiary name, beneficiary address is all written in Chinese characters, even if you're using the English system. So operationally, you have to figure out who's going to gain access to the online banking platform in order to be able to input all of this data. Okay. The next question I want you to raise is, how do we get notified of transfers in and out? Normally, and this is again why operationally you have to figure things out, is that you have to submit let me go back, apologies. You have to submit 2 telephone numbers of people who are going to operate the account. Those are Chinese mobile numbers. Usually those people will get the notifications. So you have to understand who those people are, realize that they're going to get notifications when money comes in to the account, into the various accounts, and when money comes out. Some banks will allow for, which I personally don't approve of, through WeChat. Now, I'm not a fan of this. I don't think this should be done. WeChat is one of those things where you as an individual have a WeChat account. You can't have a company WeChat account. So this is bank account information that is going through WeChat messaging. I would not recommend that, regardless of whatever staff member says anything. This is just a privacy issue. I would not do things through WeChat, okay? Do it through mobile numbers. Make sure you've got corporate mobile accounts. That just continues, and you never have to update mobile numbers in the system, okay? But understand what is going to be the communication from the bank. Now, with us, my right-hand person in Shanghai has direct communication with our relationship manager. That communication is done by WeChat, but no discussion about bank balances, about payment amounts, anything is ever done through WeChat. And that's just a policy that we have created with the bank. So again, this is again part of the homework. Have these discussions with the bank. Questions to think about is bank signatories. Who are going to be the signatories? What are going to be the signatories? Are you using CHOPS? Are you using signatures? How are you going to operate the online cash management system? Question on inbound payments to China. Ask them, how does this operationally work? What documents are needed? What is the length of time to release funds into the account? Please refer back to old webinars in the last 4 or 5 weeks. I've touched on all of inbound, outbound payment issues. So if you want more information on that, take a look at that. The same with outbound payments from China. How does this operationally work? And this is a big thing that I'm going to touch on later, where there's been a lot of changes about outbound payments from China. Okay. What is the process to pay overseas invoices? What is the process to pay dividends? If you've got interrelated company contracts and invoices, how does that work? Okay. This is where there have been a lot of changes in 2023. If you have, and again, this is where you need to list out what are the requirements for you from the banks. If you need loans, if you need credit lines, how do you get these? Something I didn't add here. If you need debit cards, if you need credit cards, how do you get those? I'm not a bank. I'm not here to tell you how you get those. Every bank branch will give you different information. You need to work that out with the bank. That's part of your homework. Okay. Understand is how easy, difficult it is to get a loan, to get a credit line, how easy, difficult it is to get a debit card, credit card for your employees. Now, choosing your banking partner, okay? Options. You have plenty of options in China. All right, you have the international banks and you've got the Chinese banks. Now, I am biased because I had a horrible falling out with HSBC, who apparently after 15 years, my business was not big enough for them. They are really only going for the top. So they gave me a 30-day notice period to leave their bank and find a new one. Since that time, I have actually found that the Chinese banks are much more flexible. There is much less administrative work that needs to be done with them. And actually, I'm more thrilled. Why did we choose an international bank when we first started in China? It's because we had been banking with HSBC Hong Kong for over 30 years. It was just a logical thing for us to go with HSBC in China. Back in 2002, to open up an HSBC account as a corporate entity was extremely straightforward, not as complicated as it is today. With these international banks, what we have found is that where I am trying to encourage you to interview the banks, it's almost like these guys are interviewing you to see whether your business is going to be large enough for them to earn any money off of you. Whereas the Chinese banks cannot reject you at all, okay? So there are certain questionnaires that you will have to fill out. There are certain details that you will have to fill out where they will then analyze whether you can become a client of theirs. Whereas with like I said, with the Chinese banks, it's no choice, okay? So I do want you to think very carefully about these international banks. The administrative processes are hard. Yeah, it's really hard. So think about it very carefully. China is complex and bureaucratic enough that to add more administrative work because you're going with an international bank that supposedly gives you comfort, I don't see the point of that. I'm a big believer in the Chinese banks. I'm very comfortable with the Chinese banks. And quite frankly, from an administrative process, they're much easier to manage your business. The question, of course, comes down to what are your needs, right? What are your types of transactions that are running through the company? So I do want to emphasize that here a little bit, okay? So analyzing your banking needs, that's up to you. Everybody's going to have different needs from their bank, okay? Understand what is the nature of your business transactions. If you are going to be primarily focused on Chinese domestic market and you're going to have predominantly Chinese domestic transactions where you're going to pay suppliers or you're going to receive money from Chinese customers, work with a local Chinese bank. This is purely because your counterparts are also going to be working with Chinese banks. So the speed and the administrative process is going to be much, much faster, okay? If, however, you are doing more cross-border transactions, then it could very well be that you're interested in working with an international bank. However, with these new regulations this year, we are seeing, and again, I don't have so many clients that work with international banks. The majority work with Chinese banks. So really, I'm talking about Citibank and HSBC predominantly. With these, it's not regulations, but with these new rigid rules that are coming into place, with the common reporting standards, paperwork is even greater with the international banks. So even if it's cross-border transactions, although I would have said in the past, go with an international bank, nowadays, I'm just saying from the administrative aspect, it's really a lot more tedious, okay? In addition to that, when you're comparing, I didn't highlight banking fees. That's obviously something you should compare. Banking fees generally with the Chinese banks is lower than with the international banks. And obviously the more cross-border transactions you have, automatically those banking fees will rise with both banks, but the cost per transaction is less with the Chinese banks. If you expect that you need a loan, then what we have found is either you get a loan from your overseas bank or you get a loan from a Chinese bank. It's very, very rare that the international banks in China themselves will give you a loan. But ask this question. It's not my place to say they will or they won't. It's just my point of view from the discussions I've seen my clients have, okay? And obviously, if you decide to use a very small bank, then you might run into also difficulties there where there are more strict regulations that have been put on them by the People's Bank of China. I just want to highlight that the international banks in China, are regulated much more strict by the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, than obviously the local Chinese banks. Oops, I should have deleted that slide. All right, the next point I want to talk about is choosing a branch location of your bank. So first, I want to talk about choosing a registered office address. When you choose your registered office address in China, you're choosing a city that you're locating in and a district that you're locating in. Now, in theory, your registered office address is also your operational office, okay? What I highly recommend is choosing a bank branch that is close to your operational office. You do not want the person who is chosen to operate the account to have to travel hours on end to get to your branch. Now that the COVID regulations are open and free, it has returned that there are a lot of things that you have to do vis-a-vis, face-to-face, than previously where it was by courier. So do choose a branch where you have easy access to, okay? What I don't want you to do is rely on your law firm, corporate service provider, accountant, outsourced accounting firm to choose the branch for you. That's not talking about the long-term operational aspect of your business. If they have to travel, that's up to them. Choose it based on where you are operationally located, okay? Make sure it is convenient. Now, there's going to be pros and cons to this, which is why you need to do your homework. But in theory, you will always find 2 to 3 different branches near your location, okay? Now, my experience, I've never been a trading company, but I am a service company. In downtown Shanghai, when historically it was only me that was operating the bank account, I used to have to wait hours on end to do certain transactions at the bank. It was painful. So if you are in a downtown location, definitely review what are peak hours, what are not peak hours, so that you can limit the amount of time that you have to be there or whoever has to be there. The biggest thing I want you to analyze when you're looking at the banks is communication, okay? And I say this because we work with ICBC. I can't communicate with our relationship manager. And occasionally I find that as an obstacle. I have to rely on my team to help me to communicate. I hate it, okay? If I had a choice today, knowing a lot more about the banking environment, I would definitely have chosen another bank, purely on this point, because I want to be able to have the flexibility to communicate from abroad, okay, should anything go wrong. So for example, I changed laptops. On my new laptop, I couldn't download Internet Explorer 7. There was 2 weeks I could not gain access to bank accounts, and I struggled. I would have loved to have just been able to pick up the phone, call the bank, and be like, what do I do to download this bloody app on my laptop? Instead, I had to have an intermediary doing the translation and showing me how everything works. So I do want you really to analyze, again, the communication aspect, which is why I say interview the banks. Understand, do you get an English-speaking relationship manager? Is there an international division at the bank that you can communicate with somebody from abroad, right? You might find this not a priority. I do find this a priority. So again, evaluate what your needs are, all right? Now, I will highlight the tendency of what foreign investors do, all right? The tendency of foreign investors is that they will go in their home jurisdiction to their bank and say, hey guys, we're looking to set up a subsidiary in Shanghai. I'm making it up now, somewhere in China. Do you guys have operations there? Now, unless they're one of these international global banks, they will say, yes, we do. And we can coordinate everything from here so that you can open up your account. Please don't do that. The reason why I say that is because if we choose the UK as an example, your UK relationship manager cannot advise you on Chinese banking regulations, and they might misunderstand, misinterpret information, which I've seen happen, okay? So try to always get a relationship manager that is on the ground in China that can give you the information direct, okay? Whether they help you with the account opening, I couldn't care less, but don't make them the sole point of contact for China, okay? There'll be a lot of mistakes that happen. And then a lot of delays, and then a lot of frustrations. Have a direct contact in China, wherever you're planning on setting up. However, you might have a bank abroad that doesn't have a subsidiary in China, or does have a subsidiary, but they don't have the banking licenses, where they will recommend somebody. So they could recommend Bank of China, ICBC, China Merchants Bank, because they have a close partnership and a close relationship. If that is the case, absolutely fine. Just understand how the communication flows. Understand what they can offer you. Are they going to be the point of contact? Are they not? Okay. Just be aware of going to your bank abroad. I think it's great if they do it. It might help in the due diligence process. It might make the incorporation of the accounts faster. But like I said, that should not be the be and all of all. I forget the expression of opening the account. Okay. The reason why I recommend Chinese banks is because the application process is faster. We have had 2 clients open up accounts with HSBC where the account opening process took 7 months. And they were HSBC clients abroad. Okay, so just saying. And for both of them, it took 7 months. Okay, and there were no anomalies in the middle of this. It just took longer than expected. Chinese banks, like I said, on average is 25 to 30 working days. Worst case, you're looking at 6 weeks. Okay. There are substantially more Chinese commercial banks than foreign bank branches. Okay, which means that if you are working with ICBC, you are guaranteed to find an ICBC branch around almost every single corner, if not every second or third road. Same with Bank of China. Okay. You will find that most of your customers, suppliers, third-party providers will be working with Chinese banks as well, allowing for the transactional speed to be, again, be much faster. So I do want you to be aware of these advantages. Again, prioritize what is of importance to you. I might have very different priorities of what I need from my bank than what you need from your bank. Understand what those are when you're going through that interview process. Now, how has banking changed in 2023? I think this is why most of you have come, and I'm just going to share with you what my observations have been. Basically, in China, China is gearing towards the common reporting standards. And as such, they are getting into standardized due diligence, KYC, and review processes for transactions as well. In addition to that, China is hoping to completely revamp the banking sector, and that this revamp will be implemented as of January 1st, 2024. And I think it is this revamp where they are going to eliminate the banking and insurance committee, I want to say, into a financial regulatory committee, so completely changing departments. And their main concern is to mitigate their risk factor within China. And what we have noticed since the borders being opened, since there's been an influx of transactions, just general day-to-day transactional volume, there have been certain changes internally for the operations. We don't know if this is going to remain, if this is just a phase, but it's been now 5 months and it's been a headache. So I want to go through a little bit of what we've noticed. So first of all, like I said, types of accounts, okay? When you are, as a foreign investor, when you're opening up in China, you're going to open up a capital contribution account, which is where your registered capital flows into. You will then have a renminbi basic account. Now, in pretty much every tier 1, tier 2 city, and with every single bank, whether the foreign banks or even the local banks, these 2 accounts have been sufficient enough. The renminbi basic account is flexible enough that you have the ability for the cross-border transactions to flow through it, exchange is occurring, just very standard stuff. We've had now the experience of opening up an account in Changshu. Oh my goodness, I forgot which bank it was. I believe it's China Merchants Bank, but I could be mistaken, but I believe it's China Merchants Bank in Changshu, in this district where our clients are based, whereby they have now said that for all cross-border transactions, you have to open up a settlement account in foreign currency, and all cross-border transactions have to go into that account. This is why I'm highlighting this now in the interview process. Wherever in China you're based, including Shanghai, understand whether this is a fixed change or not. We don't feel it is in Shanghai, but better to ask, right? Then you've got transparency. And making sure that you don't need the settlement account for the cross-border transactions. This client specifically is losing 1 month to open up this settlement account in foreign currency now, okay? In addition to that, this has always been the case, still is the case. If you need to use your foreign debt loan, which is the difference between your registered capital and total investment, you have to open up a foreign debt loan account. That takes also another 25 to 30 working days. You can only open up the foreign debt loan account when you are ready to remit that foreign debt loan. You can't open it right from the beginning, okay? But now that you know what types of accounts exist, use this as leverage when you are interviewing the banks, okay? And make sure that you check with them whether you need that settlement account in foreign currency. Keep in mind, registered capital can enter the capital contribution account only. Foreign debt loan enters the loan account only. These are separate account opening applications, okay? The renminbi basic account is an account that you can only open 1 time. It can never be shut down. You can never change that bank account. Capital accounts, foreign debt loan accounts, you can open up with different banks. You can decide to shut them down, reopen them, etc. Once the renminbi basic account is opened, that is a fixed account. You can only have 1 of those. Renminbi basic accounts, in theory, are used for all transactions that are running through the company. Imports, exports, service, domestic sales, domestic purchase, any current transfers that are occurring, okay, are happening through this renminbi basic account. Unless you are like this one client that now has to open up this settlement account in foreign currency where all cross-border transactions have to run through that account, okay? But in addition to all of that, the renminbi basic account is also used for dividend repatriation. So if you do the dividend applications, it runs through that account as well, okay? That's the renminbi basic account. How to settle domestic transactions. If it's domestic renminbi payments in China, you've got online banking. Branch banking, which is really outdated now, really what is being used as online banking or the direct connectivity with WePay, Alipay, etc. Okay. Now, unlike domestic payments, cross-border payments in China all require supporting documentation to support the authenticity of the payment. And this is where there has been big changes since January 2023, where all banks, we've experienced this with every single bank, they have become extremely more stringent in the documentation and invoices that you are providing. And this is both for inbound and outbound cross-border payments. Okay. And I want people to be aware of this. All right. Starting point, trade transactions. If you have trade transactions and you're buying and selling goods, this is still very straightforward. Okay. You've got your purchase orders, your sales confirmations, you've got your logistical documentation, right? You've got bills of lading, etc. This is straightforward. This is standard documentation. It's always been the case. It still is the case today. Where it has become more stringent is the following, and I want to give you guys examples so you can understand how tedious this has become. We have a client based in Beijing who are a commission-based entity in Beijing, which means that they are brokering deals on behalf of their HQ. The HQ has direct contracts with Chinese customers selling high-value machinery. The Beijing entity is there to broker those deals and to also then provide after-sale services. In order to sustain the operation in Beijing, they are issuing commission invoices where they get a percentage of every big machinery that is sold. As of January 2023, for these commission invoices, it is a requirement from the bank that the contract between the UK and the Chinese customer, including the invoice between the UK and the Chinese customer, is translated and provided to the bank to show proof of this commission payment. Previously, all that had to be shown was the contract, the commission agreement between the UK entity and the subsidiary in Beijing, and the invoice. Now, this supplemental information is required. Thankfully, no pre-contracts need to be submitted, so nothing from 2022, 21, 20 previous years, but only starting from January 2023. Now, this has become a headache for the UK to get these documents, to have these documents readily available, to have them translated, to have the invoices readily available. And basically, the bank has openly said, you can transfer the commission to the Beijing entity, but we will not release those funds until we have this additional supporting information. This can lead to cash flow issues if you don't get your act together, okay? And there's no going around it. If you don't provide it, they won't release the funds. So it's becoming a headache now, guys. You've got to get organized with your documentation. I can tell you in the case of Woodburn, we have our Hong Kong operation that pays for a lot of our marketing costs that we do globally. And we do it out of Hong Kong for ease, because to get payments out of China is always tedious, takes a couple of weeks. So we just do it out of Hong Kong, and every quarter China reimburses Hong Kong. As of January 2023, and in our case, they have requested all 2022 supporting documents. We have to show the original contracts paid by Hong Kong to all of our third-party marketing suppliers, trade shows, whatever we are doing on a global basis. We have to show the contracts and supporting invoices. Now, you can imagine the amount of work that we had to go through administratively to get that sorted for 2022. Now we have a system readily available to manage 2023. And this is something we've just always done, right? Now, on top of all of that, we have to get those contracts translated by a certified translator, because that is what is submitted then to the bank, and the invoices. So just from a bureaucratic standpoint, and these are all different banks, guys, right? Like I said, it's with every bank that this is occurring. We've just had the case now where we have a client who is bringing operational funds through service contracts into their Shanghai operation. They had a backlog of 3 invoices. They paid those 3 invoices in the same week. And the bank is now saying, please never delay payments like this. Now we can only release funds 1 week at a time. So one invoice we will release this week, the other invoice, the money is sitting in China in an escrow account. The bank will not release the funds because it was all done in a block and not done at the appropriate times according to the invoices. So they're going to release one invoice now, one invoice next week, another invoice the following week. All right. Things are getting trickier with these cross-border payments. Make sure that you're not faking anything, because otherwise you really have to create a lot of fake supporting documentation that could disturb your audit at the year end or could cause issues later on down the line. Okay, and I say this because the goal of a lot of foreign investors in China is to repatriate money out, right, through things that are not necessarily real. But now additional supporting documentation is required. If you are at a stage where you have not experienced this yet, you might experience this soon. So be aware of it, okay? Now, we all know that the Chinese government has a closed foreign exchange system. And so there has always been a rigid rule about money coming in and money going out. We want you to be aware that this is just getting more strict, okay, and more tedious. Be aware of this. There are, I just put this slide in because I don't know if people are aware of it, but banks and financial institutions in China have to report all domestic and overseas cash transactions of more than 50,000 RMB. Banks also need to report any overseas transfers by individuals of more than 10,000 USD. And all banks have to report to the central government on every single foreign exchange transaction of at least 5 million USD. So this is just the bank's reporting requirements to the central government, as well as to the PBOC. Action plan. I've created an action plan for people to get organized because it has become a lot more bureaucratic. So if you are in the phase where you're looking at incorporating your structure in China, please interview 2 to 3 banks. Understand who you want to work with. Do they service your needs? Initiate that direct and open dialogue with your bank relationship manager. Okay, I wish I had it. That's one of my regrets. The next is educate yourself on how you plan to operate the bank account. And what are the expectations from the bank? Now, I've just put in this sentence here because I'm only talking about the bank in this episode. I'm not even talking about what the expectations are from your tax bureau for cross-border transactions, okay? In the case of, and I'll use this as an example of how ridiculous this has all become, in the case of Woodburn, with this internal agreement to pay back marketing costs, we have 3 versions of our agreement now, as of January 2023. One version, which is the official version between our 2 entities. We have one version, which is for the tax bureau because they've made amendments to it. And we have a 3rd version with the bank because the bank has made amendments to it as well. Okay, that's how ridiculous this is. And at some point, you have to realize that you just have to go with the flow and say, okay, we're going to have 3 versions of agreement. We have to realize that one version is for the tax bureau, one version is for the bank. The versions for the tax bureau and the bank don't even match. I just want to highlight that. But that's what we're dealing with if we want processes to go smoothly and to operate smoothly within the whole system, because our goal is to either get money in or get money out. All right. So understand what the expectations are from the bank. It would be great if at the same time you know what the expectations are from the tax bureau, but really you can only know that once you've incorporated the entity, once the bank account is open, once you start operating. Create standard operating guidelines on who will operate the account, how will it be operated, what are the internal approval requirements, okay? Also create in that standard operating guideline, what are the standard documents that have to be prepared for cross-border transactions. You can also say what has to be prepared for domestic transactions. It's good to have this because the auditors will request this in any case. But now that you know the changes that have occurred in 2023, get yourself prepared with these standard operating guidelines where you already have a list of what documents have to be prepared. This gives the heads up to the HQ. It gives a heads up to your China operation in terms of what needs to be readily available. Get prepared regarding internal transactions and the documents needed. Now, internal transactions, I'm referring to sister company related transactions, okay? Not third parties, just intercompany related transactions. We have found since January that particularly the intercompany related transactions are what is really strictly looked at, both for inbound and outbound. So make sure they are authentic agreements, make sure you've got all the supporting documentation for this, make sure that you've got the invoices associated with it, and create a document, like a folder document that you've got everything readily available when and if needed. If you really want to be prepared, make sure all of these agreements are in Chinese, and know that both the tax bureaus and banks will require certified translations, okay? Doing the translation yourself will not suffice. That's the end of the conversation regarding banks. There seem to be a few comments that are listed in here. Let me see if there are any questions at all. Kim, appreciate your feedback as always. So Kim, I'll just, he's written it to everybody. So if you guys open your chat box, you can also read his story. So I'm not, it's very lengthy, so I don't want to read it all out. But I do want people to realize, and Kim has also confirmed this based on his own experiences in China, we are all struggling, okay? Be aware of the struggle that you might have. And don't forget to do your homework, okay? And understand how it's going to work. Robert, I don't hand out slides, but just be aware that the recording will be provided to everybody. So the recording is available to the whole Thrive in China community. Biggest takeaway is get a set of knee pads. Fair enough, Kim. My biggest takeaway is have a lot of patience, and be in a moment of zen when there are issues that arise with the banks. I hope this has been very useful to all of you. Again, I wanted to provide insight. And if you do struggle with corporate bank accounts, or you want to understand how you can best operate them, don't hesitate to reach out. We are providing complimentary calls to see if we can help you. In the email that will be sent out, I will provide you a link to our diary to do that. And just to update you, our next Thrive in China roundtable next week is how the invoicing Fapiao system works in China in 2023. What are the practical changes that have occurred? And this will pertain particularly with the whole e-Fapiao system. We have seen quite a few changes with that. There seems to be a big push in 2023 for a lot of companies, including us, to go e-Fapiao. I am not sure if it's good or bad, but stay tuned for next week's presentation to see also my point of view around this, just from an efficiency perspective, what problems we are seeing for clients that are trading with this, both in e-commerce as well as B2B, and stay tuned for that. If you guys are subscribed to the community, it's the same link every Wednesday. You don't need to re-register for the event. But I do want to thank you for supporting us and joining this community. Norbert, digitalization seems to be at the end more time consuming and nerve-wracking. It is. It is absolutely absurd that the cash management platforms in China are not updating to use the newest engines like Chrome, like Microsoft Edge, etc. My biggest fear is that from abroad, I won't have access to my Chinese account because at some point my laptop won't allow me to get Internet Explorer 7. And for me, I found no solution around this. The banks have not said anything, they have no nothing. And that's really one of my biggest concerns is really the online system. So that's the end of today's presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining me. Stay tuned for next week. And I look forward to speaking with you then. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care and speak to you soon. Bye.